Hi, I'm Reid, Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, and welcome to our series, Let's Talk About Light and Health. This is a production of the National Lighting Bureau with Mount Sinai's Light and Health Research Center. The name of this session is Proceed with Caution, Lighting for Emergency Responder Safety. I'm joined by John Bullough, Program Director of the Light and Health Research Center, and Jack Sullivan, Director of Training, Emergency Responder Safety Institute. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you.
Happy to have you both here. Now, John, you've been part of a wide range of research over the years. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into transportation and specifically for emergency vehicles?
Well, my first job out of school was with the Lighting Research Center. It was part of RPI. I'm now with Mount Sinai, but while we were there, it was very close to Albany. So we actually got a chance to do some work with the New York State Department of Transportation. One of the very first projects I worked on was on snowplow lighting. So not only the headlights to be able to see through blowing snow, but also the flashing lights that are on those vehicles to help other people make sure that they can avoid colliding with those in that nasty weather we have here in upstate New York.
Jack, how did you come to be involved with the Emergency Responder Safety Institute?
I would tell you it was unwillingly. I was a volunteer firefighter for about 25 years. And in the last department that I was in, I operated as the safety officer in that department because I also had a career in the insurance industry in safety and fire protection work. And there was an incident in March of 1998 where the fire department that I had just retired from had a crash on the Pennsylvania Turnpike that was a result of a tractor trailer running into a previous crash scene and hit 10 of our personnel, 2 EMTs and 8 firefighters. One of the firefighters did not survive that incident. And at the time in 1998, roadway incident safety was not a big topic in the fire service. And my experience in the safety world said, this is something that we need to look at, analyze, what can we do different, what can we do better? And that actually led to combining efforts with the Cumberland Valley Volunteer Firemen's Association that also experienced a line of duty death that year. And together we formed the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, which is actually a committee of the Cumberland Valley Volunteer Firemen's Association to work specifically on the subject of roadway incident safety for emergency responders.
Okay. Interesting. You talk about, creating a solution where there's a real need. Is your organization nationwide?
Yes. Yeah, we do work. It's a volunteer organization, so all of the people that are associated with our group are volunteers. And we do training and education on the subject of roadway incident safety and traffic incident management to all of the disciplines that work on the roadway at incident scenes. That's our specialty area, not pre-planned work zones, so to speak, but emergency incidents, disabled vehicles, car crashes, vehicle fires, hazmat incidents, medical emergencies along the roadway, brush fires, building fires, anything that puts our people in connection with moving traffic. We're trying to teach best practices to prevent struck by injuries and fatalities.
Well, can you share with us some of the statistics on accidents with emergency responders? And is there a certain time of day or night that these occur?
I just spent the last hour and a half on an interview with the University of Alabama Transportation Institute talking about systems to collect struck by information and close calls. And the reality is that there is not a good system in place nationwide to collect this data. We have been collecting data, we, the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, have been collecting data on struck by fatalities for a number of years now. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources available to also collect the information on those incidents that result in injuries or property damage to the emergency vehicles. So there are an awful lot of emergency vehicles that are being struck at incident scenes, fire trucks in particular, when they're set in a blocking position on the interstate to prevent people from running into the responders and the victims of the initial incident. Those fire trucks very often receive significant damage and many times are totaled. We don't have a good handle on exactly how many of those emergency vehicles, police cars, fire trucks, ambulances, tow trucks, safety service patrols are struck and damaged. We don't have a good handle on the number of injuries, but I can tell you that in the years 2019 to 2022, we had 206 struck by vehicle fatalities involving law enforcement officers, firefighters, EMTs, tow truck operators, road service technicians, and DOT safety service patrol operators.
That's horrible. That is absolutely horrible. I would have thought there would have been 10 or 20. All right, John, let's talk about car headlight glare. And people seem to be more interested in that than ever. But what about glare from flashing lights of emergency vehicles? How much interest is there in solving that issue?
Well, it doesn't seem quite as hot of a topic as headlights. I hear a lot about headlight glare, and that's certainly an important question. But more and more, especially with LEDs, I think that's one of the technologies that has so much promise, but also, has some additional things that we have to think about. I mean, just the fact that LEDs are so efficient compared to a halogen source, for example, they can put out a lot more light for, not as much energy, and that increased brightness, obviously then translates into making it harder to see an emergency responder when they're alongside the road, standing near their vehicles. But LEDs also have some interesting characteristics, like they produce very saturated colors, and the more saturated a color is, it tends to look very vivid and very bright. And LEDs turn on and off very rapidly. And so those factors actually make some LED flashing lights look brighter, look more uncomfortable to our eyes. And so those things are definitely trends that are going on with the ability to make brighter lights and not necessarily put as much drain on the electrical system of the vehicle.
Okay. Jack, in your experience, do you find or hear about accidents that are happening because of glare from these emergency lights?
Yes, and I would tell you that the first glare that we were concerned with years ago was sun glare, because we had a number of struck by incidents that we got information from the people involved that the driver who struck the emergency responder was blinded by sun glare coming around the corner or whatever, and usually during the morning commute or the afternoon commute. When we got to emergency lighting involving LEDs, very honestly, the first generation of LED warning lights for the emergency services folks were not very impressive. We were still using strobes and other types of lighting for the most part, and the industry had to come up with what we refer to now as bigger, brighter, faster flashing warning lights to get the attention of emergency services. And we kind of got our wish. Now we have emergency warning lights that very often generate complaints from drivers and the general public about being too bright at nighttime and in low light conditions, especially when you have 3, 4, or 5 emergency vehicles all parked at the same incident with all of their warning lights on at the same time. It can create a purple blob on the horizon that people cannot see the emergency responders walking around the vehicles or operating at the incident scene. And there have been some cases where responders have been struck because the driver could not see them next to their emergency vehicle because of the warning lights.
And one of the things that we found, Randy, is that, when we think of these flashing lights, and I think even many agencies with emergency responders think of them this way, that the primary function is to get your attention, is to alert you that there's something there. And those flashing lights are very, very good at that. And a brighter flashing light in some ways is even better at getting your attention, right? Alerting you. But we've thought about these lights and what they're supposed to do. And really, when you think about it, they're not only supposed to get your attention, but hopefully then they can give you some information. The idea is, what kind of vehicles am I approaching? Is this an emergency situation? Are the vehicles moving? Are they stopped on the side of the road? Is it a utility? Whatever kind of vehicle it might be. And then hopefully those lights can also help manage what drivers are doing, right? So the idea is, do the drivers need to come to a stop? Do they need to slow down? Do they need to move over a lane or two? So we've sort of thought of this in terms of an acronym we call AIM, A-I-M, Alert, Inform, and Manage. What we've gotten really well is the alerting part. We definitely can get people's attention. These lights are now bright enough that even on a bright sunny day, these LEDs can be bright enough to get our attention. The problem is that, especially when we talk about nighttime or those kinds of situations where we don't need the lights to be as bright, we're really not doing as well as informing and managing drivers in terms of how they should approach and pass by these situations, or if they need to stop. So we're not really giving them information that they can use to make good decisions. We've gotten their attention, but now they don't know what to do, and there's just a lot of light. So they know there's something there, but not necessarily what it is or how they should get around it.
What you're talking about is this NIOSH study. Am I correct?
Well, that's one of the studies we've done with, NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. We were working with them to try to understand, okay, there's minimum standards for how bright these lights need to be to make sure that they're going to be visible on a bright sunny day. And that's obviously important. The problem is those standards, again, were written around light sources that may not have had the ability to create such bright light. So having that minimum intensity for daytime vision doesn't necessarily mean we want to use that same level for nighttime. So some of it is just evaluating those lights, not only in the daytime, but also at night, to make sure that they're not overly blinding or glaring, and just being aware of what else they're supposed to be doing for drivers who are approaching those.
So I assume that an emergency vehicle has different levels of light. They're not just going on and off. The driver or someone in the vehicle can change the intensity. Is that correct?
Yeah, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So I can tell you that the general feeling is that bigger, brighter, faster flashing lights are safer. And even though their system might be designed to dim down the lights at nighttime or in low light conditions, there's an awful lot of folks in our business out there that still think that brighter flashing lights are safer for them at any time of the day or night.
Well, I can see somebody untrained thinking, oh, this is night, so we need the fullest light possible. We need the most light possible because it's night.
Yeah.
So I really do see that dilemma. So is your institute doing some training of these first responders?
Sure. We're trying to educate them about, number one, the capability that new LED warning lights can have. Of course, that means in some cases their organization might have to spend extra money on the next emergency vehicle to get those additional capabilities, but to also share with them information that we've learned from some of the studies that have been done, including the one that we had done through John and his crew, that shows that dimming down the lights at nighttime and in low light conditions can be more effective. You can still see the warning light from a distance, but it's also better for the drivers approaching the incident scene to be able to see the responders operating on the ground around those emergency vehicles.
All right, John, why don't you expand on that study a little bit? Give us some more flavor into what you guys did.
Sure. The idea here is that, again, you have these minimum standards that probably are applicable to daytime conditions, right? So a bright sunny day, you want to make sure that light can be bright enough to be attention getting. But then the question is do you need to have that intensity at all times, right? So as part of the study that we did in collaboration with the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, we set up some conditions where we looked at different intensity levels, and this was done at nighttime with a silhouette, a decoy of a first responder, like a firefighter or a police officer standing next to the vehicle, so that we could actually measure when did a person driving past this scene, when were they able to see the responder? When could they tell that there was someone there? And this is someone who was wearing a reflective vest, so it's not that they were just completely dim or dark. They were wearing something that was reflective that would help, reflect some of the light from their headlights. And we found that, you can go to quite, less than a third of the intensity level that you would need for, again, a bright sunny day at night, and still have something that's highly visible. And that would make it much easier to see that firefighter or the police officer or whoever it might be standing next to their vehicle from further away, which would give you more time then to respond and say, oh, I need to make sure I'm not getting too close to that person. there's someone there, I need to slow down, I need to move over. Whatever that maneuver is, they would have more time to do it.
Okay, John, to that point though, can we do anything with different color of flashing lights? Can color signify something?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure Jack has more to add to this, but one of the things we found is, you often see in different states, and it's a little bit different for every state. Sometimes the color tells you whether this is a police car or a fire engine or a maintenance truck or a utility truck. So you might see amber lights on a utility truck, blue lights on a police car, red lights on a fire engine, but not every state has the exact same code. So that's part of a problem, that when you cross a state line, you might see a flashing blue light and it means something different than what you're used to. The other thing that we found is just the way that the eyes respond to that light. In terms of not being able to see a first responder, it really doesn't matter what the color of the light is. In other words, just the intensity of the light reaching our eyes affects our ability to see it. But at the same time, when the light is more blue, has more blue content, a bluer light is going to create more discomfort to an oncoming driver than a red or yellow light. So we found in that study that people were rating the glare from those lights as much worse from a blue light than they would from a red or yellow light of the same intensity. Even though their visibility wasn't necessarily more impacted, their comfort is, but that can have a lot of implications on where exactly they're going to be looking along the road, how distracted they are by those lights. So that's something that, again, the standards have specific intensity levels, but don't necessarily say, okay, if this is a bluer light, your drivers are going to be more uncomfortable looking at that light. They're not going to feel like it's as comfortable as a different color, and they're going to maybe behave differently. None of that is currently in the standards, but there definitely are differences in the way we respond to different colors of light.
So that leads to my next question. What about the color of lights when a vehicle is traveling to an incident as opposed when they're parked at an incident? Should we have different colors for that?
We tell them that you can make all the chaos you want with emergency warning lights and sirens when you're traveling to an incident. We want to get people's attention well in advance. It's when they're parked at an incident scene that we would prefer that they have a more calming emergency warning light set up. But they can make as much noise and use as many bright lights as they want when they're traveling.
Okay.
And that's interesting, because we've also found that, like, just the speed of the lights, right? With LEDs, you can flash these lights at any speed, and because you don't have something that's physically rotating around at the top of the vehicle like you did in the old days when you had a rotating beacon. So you can have very fast flashing lights, or they can be slower, right? And it's the same. It's just a control circuit that can do this. And people will interpret the faster flashing as something that is more either more urgent or more dangerous, something they need to take more care about. And so, like Jack said, when you have a vehicle that is trying to get to an incident scene as quickly as it possibly can, and of course safely, having that faster flashing, brighter lights is probably not so bad, because it does get our attention, as long as we as drivers are courteous enough to get out of the way, move over, let it pass, and then we can finish our trip. When the vehicle is at a location, it's parked, then going to something that's a slower flash, reducing the intensity, those types of things. Actually, even just a slower flash rate will allow people to see those people working around the vehicle more quickly. And so you can really make a difference by doing that. And even if you don't necessarily make commercials and PSAs and tell everyone, well, when the lights are flashing more quickly, just get out of the way. When the lights are flashing more slowly, that means the vehicles are sort of in park and they're not going to be moving. You can use that as a code that people will eventually learn. We found in studies that even when we didn't tell people what a faster or slower flash rate meant, once they had seen it a few times, they started to learn, and they began to then use that as information to say, okay, I know that vehicle isn't going anywhere. Now I'm just going to be careful as I pass by, as opposed to that vehicle is rushing towards me, has very fast, bright flashing lights. I'm going to just get over on the side of the road, let it go by me, and then I'll figure out what I do next.
Okay. So are there standards for lighting of emergency vehicles? And who publishes those standards?
There are standards in the National Fire Protection Association for fire apparatus. It's my understanding that the law enforcement community does not have standards across the board for their emergency vehicles. Ambulances that are designed to a government standard do have some, they have some recommendations in the standard on emergency warning lights, but frankly, some of those the standard was written quite a while ago and is not up to date on the current technology.
Okay, so Jack, it sounds like to me it's up to you. It's up to your organization, right?
There's a lot of education that needs to be done. I think people are right now in emergency services looking at the fact that they can get brighter, faster flashing warning lights than were ever available before. And until we educate them about how much safer, slower flashing lights can be at nighttime and in low light conditions, it's going to take a while to get the best utilization of the technology that's available. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and there are some industry standards like the Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE. They do a lot of vehicle standards, and they publish some standards again on warning flashing lights or emergency lights. But the standard doesn't give you a whole lot of information. They'll have a little bit on either how slowly or quickly they can flash, and then again some minimum intensity levels for a particular light. And what we've been seeing is that, whereas maybe in the old days, a few decades ago, there might be one light on a emergency vehicle that would be flashing, and now you see many, many more. And so you have a minimum standard for each of these individual lights, but now you have what could be a half a dozen or a dozen different lights all flashing on these cars, each of which meets the minimum standard, but then ends up producing 6 to 10 times more light than you would normally have from one of the older single lights that you might have on those vehicles.
We just got our first report in the last couple of weeks about an incident involving an autonomous vehicle that ran into an emergency vehicle. And some of the preliminary information coming from that incident was that the flashing lights on the emergency vehicle confused the autonomous vehicle because of the level of ambient lighting at the time. It might be another reason for us to even push more so to get people to reduce the intensity of the lighting at nighttime and in low light conditions, especially in those areas where they have a lot of autonomous vehicles operating. When it comes to the color of the vehicles, what a can of worms for the emergency services folks, especially the fire service. In the last few years, we have started to see the delivery of fire trucks that are black, which we've never seen before, or that have blacked out features all the way around. And the general feeling in those departments is, number one, that color combination is cool and attracts potentially more younger firefighters to join that organization. And the fact that the emergency warning lights on that vehicle provide all of the visibility that's needed when that vehicle is traveling to an emergency and or parked and stopped at an incident scene. It's not just community pride necessarily, it's that cool factor that some departments are looking at with an eye towards trying to attract some of the younger generation to solve their staffing needs that are popping up all over the country.
I don't know what to say to that. I mean, I see both sides of it, right? I absolutely see both sides of that. They've got to, if we don't have firefighters, we're in big trouble. And if they have done studies that show that they like to ride around in a black truck, and that's, I'm just at a loss for words on that.
I think school's out on that yet. We're waiting to see how that experiment works out, but it's happening on a regular basis at this point. Not all fire trucks are red anymore.
Well, gentlemen, please stick around. We are going to now open the floor to questions. Okay, hello, everyone. Jack, John, thank you for joining us. And I want to open the floor now for questions. Please do hit the Q&A button if you would like to ask a question, or you can raise your hand. We will unmute your phone and you can ask the question yourself. Or if you don't want to do that, we will just read the question for you. I would like to introduce Jennifer Bronze. Jennifer is our producer, and she is the person behind the scenes that has made everything happen. So Jennifer, welcome.
While we're waiting for some questions to go to come trickling in, I had a couple questions for Jack. I'm wondering if there are any data about whether these new LED lights that are creating a cacophony on the vehicles, how they compare to legacy technologies and the rear end collisions, if there's any information about whether it's more dangerous or if there's more likelihood of these kinds of rear ending of emergency vehicles with more output.
I can't say that there's actually any evidence one way or the other that compares the two. John probably might have a study that he can refer to, but the general feeling is the technology has moved on to LEDs. Almost anybody who orders a new emergency vehicle is going to specify LED lighting for it for a lot of reasons, not just because of the type of lighting that it provides, but also the savings in electrical power and whatnot on the vehicles themselves. Everybody knows that they're capable of being much brighter. And one of the things that we've pushed for a number of years is, as we teach people to park their emergency vehicles on a little bit of an angle at an incident scene, we have to remind them that it's important that the emergency lighting on the vehicle provides coverage 360 degrees, so that when they park their vehicle on an angle, they don't lose some of the visibility of the emergency lighting on the rear of the vehicle. So the older style rotating warning lights on the top end of the back of a fire truck, for example, give you the capability to park on any angle and still get good visibility of that lighting. You can do that with LEDs. The problem is many people specify flat-faced LED warning lights on the rear of the fire truck, for example, instead of ones that provide for 360-degree capability. So there's a variety of ways to address your question with new technology and with old technology, and it's a matter of personal preference and sometimes financial capability of the departments that are ordering the apparatus and equipment.
And in addition to that, I would just add that there are some, organizations that are trying to keep track of sort of what happens in some of these incidents. And they're not necessarily, these are more like case reports. For example, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, has some reports of when there's an incident involving a law enforcement officer and those sorts of things. And obviously, it's not a statistical survey of what's going on across the country, but there are examples where there have been, lighting systems that are being used, and in sort of going back into those specific incidents, finding that things like, using lights to either sequentially or use some kind of configuration that helps give people a sense of what direction they should go would be helpful. And sometimes the lights on these vehicles are flashing somewhat randomly, and you have on and off lights with no real meaningful pattern. In other words, you know that there's an emergency, but it doesn't help you understand, do I need to go to the right or to the left? That some of those functions might have helped. And that is something that at least the LED technology could do. I think Jack's point about having the 360-degree lighting to make sure that vehicle, an emergency is chaotic. You don't know what's going to happen. Those vehicles have to pull up to whatever direction and angle they can. And so you don't know which side of the vehicle is going to be facing oncoming traffic. And so having the ability to have the, lights that can work in all those directions is important.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing to that, because John brings up a good point. We also advocate for the use of arrow boards and variable message signs on emergency vehicles too, that help to promote giving the approaching traffic a message of what we want them to do. So the warning lights say that we're here, but the arrow boards and variable message boards can give a message that indicates by an arrow which direction the traffic has to go to pass the emergency scene safely, or to tell them to slow down, or that a lane is blocked, or whatever the case may be. It's difficult to put those types of equipment on a lot of different types of emergency vehicles. There are people that have done it and done it very successfully with great results. So there's one more thing that we can think about when it comes to lighting.
Great. We have a message from Jeff Harkey. So Jeff was asking, what kind of feedback do you have on LED lights that are now mimicking rotating lights? Are they attempting to replicate rotating lights? And any thoughts about that kind of technology that used to go around?
Yeah, there's a couple of manufacturers out there that are doing it, and it seems to be a matter of personal preference right now. Michigan State Police just redid the type of warning light that's on the top of their vehicles and went with a little bit lower profile LED that mimics a rotating LED type light. And some fire departments have experimented with them. I think they have value, especially on certain locations on the rig, to take care of that 360 capability that we were talking about. If you mount them on the corners, it helps when you park your vehicle on an angle. I think they have a lot of promise, and I think it's a matter of personal preference that's driving it right now.
Yeah, I think we've done some evaluations with New York State a few years back, and it, to me, it was very interesting that sometimes people couldn't even tell that these were not rotating. There weren't actually a physical object rotating. And one of the advantages of it doesn't have to be that configuration, but the idea that you have some light that's on at all times and not necessarily have these on and off flashes, because that can make a big difference in helping people judge as they're approaching it, how quickly they're approaching, how fast is that vehicle moving, if it's a slow moving vehicle along the road or stopped. When there's sort of always some light present, that helps make it easier for drivers to judge how quickly they're approaching it. And obviously that's part of avoiding those crashes.
Great. Now, Tim, I think you had a question as well.
Yes, ma'am. I've got actually three concerns. First is during the daytime, most people cannot see emergency lights. They can more or less ignore them because they're not bright enough. And just the opposite at nighttime, they're so bright that the drivers are confused and don't know which way to go. So I think it's a question of intensity, both during the daytime and nighttime with the different types of lights. And my third concern is there's so many new fire apparatus manufacturers that are putting amber lights on apparatus now. And we've been so ingrained over the years that an amber light was a utility vehicle or a tow truck or something along that sort, and people really don't pay much attention to it. And the red clear is what you really notice. But with the more usage of the amber lights, are people going to start ignoring fire apparatus because of that amber lights, or do we need to have almost a national standard to go by for emergency lighting?
Well, I'll take a stab at answering that a little bit. First thing is, Tim, the NFPA standard does address the use of amber warning lights to the rear of emergency fire trucks. It's an option. You can use it if you want, or you can go all red. We did have one state a number of years ago that tried to get us to support the idea of rear-facing flashing white lights, which we did not subscribe to, and suggested the amber might be a different solution. I think one of the things we're still trying to figure out is, as people are driving down the road and they approach an incident scene, the flashing lights attract their attention. The more they're watching the flashing lights and the activity that's going on at the incident scene, the less they're paying attention to what's in front of them and the traffic in front of them. And in some cases, they're actually starting to drift in the direction that they're looking. And anything that we can do to warn them of our presence, but at the same time, not keep them so fascinated that they literally drive into the back of a vehicle displaying warning lights, might be a good thing. And the idea behind the amber and the reason it's in the NFPA standard is because of the fact that it provided a warning light, but maybe didn't attract quite as much attention as blue and red lights did. With the technology changing and the type of emergency lighting that's out there, the amber lights have a different appearance now than they did in halogen technology, for example. And I guess it's still out as to whether we should be encouraging the use of amber on the rear or not. Maybe John's got something to suggest there from some of the work that he's done. But at the same time, I think people are doing it now because it is in the NFPA standard.
Yeah, just quickly add to that answer, which is starting with the brightness. I mean, your issue about the daytime visibility and making sure the lights are bright enough is important. The NFPA for fire apparatus does have a minimum standard for the sort of sum total of all the lights on each side of the vehicle to make sure that it's going to be visible. And we did find that if you don't meet that standard, you can, in a study in 2022, we presented at the Society of Automotive Engineers World Congress, that if the lights aren't meeting that minimum brightness in the daytime, you can have some issues that they're not as noticeable. Regarding the amber color on emergency situations, emergency vehicles, I do think there's some concern. We've just recently finished an experiment that we'll be presenting next year, but it does indicate that that people do seem to look at the amber lights as a less of an emergency situation, that in their minds it might represent something with a little bit less urgency, and that could affect how they respond or behave around that vehicle. Certainly, they should always move over and take care of the workers, whether they're emergency responders or tow truck operators or highway workers. A life is a life, of course, but there are going to be these natural instincts that kick in when we know it's an emergency situation versus maybe a maintenance operation or something else that's going on. And what we found is just making the color as well as the way the lights flash and the vehicle markings and so on as consistent as possible can go a long way at helping people understand what type of situation they're approaching and how they should respond as they try to pass by safely.
We'll have another question from an anonymous attendee who wants to know, is it common for a warning light to be controlled on or off based on a switch? Are there systems currently available on the market to control the warning lights so that they dim and change speed appropriately based on your research?
Yeah, I know Jack probably knows a lot more about the specific systems that are out there and what's available. But yes, I think in many cases there are different flash patterns. You can have faster or slower flashing lights. You can increase or decrease the brightness of those lights. It's just a question of making sure that the people using them are aware and know when they should do that.
Yeah, I would agree. The technology is pretty amazing, which you can do with the modern LED warning light systems. There are a number of manufacturers that offer an ambient light sensor as part of the warning package that detects what the ambient lighting is like at the time, so that a police officer initiating a traffic stop at 5 o'clock in the afternoon might start with the warning lights at full power for daytime type visibility. As the lighting changes, depending on the time of the year, and starts to get darker out, the system can automatically change using that ambient light sensor to whatever is programmed into the system for nighttime or low light conditions. We have a lot of people who have purchased these systems without fully understanding the capabilities of what can be programmed into those systems. And frankly, I don't think the manufacturers and suppliers sometimes do as good a job as they could of educating personnel what they can do with these packages that they're buying and what level of flexibility they have based on the amount of money that they're spending on the systems. But the technology has enormous capabilities of doing all kinds of things automatically. One of the things that on police cars are doing nowadays, when the police officer makes a traffic stop and puts his vehicle in park, the lighting system automatically changes, illuminates the front takedown lights, as they call them. And when he opens the door, it shuts off some of the lighting on the left side of the vehicle so that it doesn't inhibit his view of the car in front of him and what's going on around him. That's all done automatically. Wow. The trooper or the officer does not have to push any switches or anything like that. It's done based on the way they program the car to react for different types of situations. Same thing with some of the other vehicles that are out there. A lot of capabilities. You just have to know how to take advantage of those capabilities and have them programmed appropriately.
And I think to that point, Jack's organization, the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, has information that responders and their agencies can use, even just to ask questions of the people they're buying these lights from on their website, respondersafety.com. It's a great place to go to start to try to understand what some of those capabilities are. Maybe they're already in some of the systems that these organizations have, and as they're going to buy new systems in the future, what are some of the questions they can ask just to see if they can get that functionality or maybe already have access to it.
Well, why don't we go ahead and wrap here? So, John, I want to thank you and Jack for your participation. Very informative. I know that I learned a lot. Jennifer, we appreciate your help in producing this. And then we will work hard over the next few days to get this edited. We will publish it on YouTube. The Light and Health Research Center will have a link to it. The NLB will post it. We'll put it up on Edison Report as well. But we want to thank everyone in our audience for attending, and we thank our panelists. Take care.